In a way, we have killed our joy for learning languages by this obsession with testing, with assessing their grammar.
My first internship was like a bit of a shock. Parents coming and asking me like, but why are they are not learning verbs? How is it possible? Because they need to learn the verbs. I was this young teacher who really wanted to change things and was stuck with this system.
One of the stronger messages in your research is the assessment that we use in the classroom is not neutral, because in a way it shapes what teachers do, it shapes how students learn.
We need more validity, actually, in school context. One of the principles is the unpredictability. You need to have an element that is not known in advance, because this is real life. It made them proactive. They would think, okay, what kind of question I can get? What kind of vocabulary I need? It's different than giving a list and say, those are the words, you have to learn them.
If we change the way we assess, then we can change the way we teach. How do you explain this idea to teachers who see assessment as something completely different, completely separate from instruction?
It's more important to put some more emotions in language learning, because you learn a language in the end, it's something that will do something with yourself, will change yourself. And this is the reason why we became language teachers.
This is the Teacher Talking Time podcast.
Today's guest is Charline Rouffet, a foreign language teacher, educator, and researcher whose work sits at the intersection of multilingualism, task-based learning, and classroom-based assessment. After teaching in French secondary schools, Charline is now completing her PhD at Utrecht University, where she investigates how communicative, classroom-based assessment can reshape teachers' pedagogical practices. Her work offers a powerful lens on how assessment can drive more meaningful and task-oriented language teaching. Lou and I are really excited for the conversation today because Charline's research has the potential to not only question and impact what we assess, how we assess, but how teachers think about instruction itself. And speaking of instruction, this episode is brought to you by our friends at Fluentize. Fluentize is a library of over 650 ready-to-teach ESL lessons built around my favorite part, authentic videos for your adult and teenage students. Learn more on their website, fluentize.com. That link is in the show notes. And if you could do Leo and I a huge favor and hit that subscribe button wherever you're listening to this show, it would really help us out. With that said, let's dive into our conversation with Charline.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Teacher Talking Time podcast. Here today with us, we have a guest that came highly recommended by two previous guests on the show. Charline Rouffet, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Charline, I spent a little bit of time doing some reading, some research, looking at your work, and based on everything that I've read so far, it seems that everything that you do sits at the intersection of research, of classroom practice, and of course, systemic change. And one of the things that really stood out to me the most as I was reading some of your work is how deeply you engage with teachers, which is something extremely important because we always find that there's this gap, this distance between research and teaching in the classroom. And you've looked very closely at how and why communicative language teaching often fails to materialize itself in classrooms. And of course, you've also done a lot of work on how assessments can either reinforce old habits or, of course, also unlock entirely different ways of teaching in the classroom. But before we get into the heart of your research, I'd love to begin with your story. Who is Charline Rouffet, and why does your work matter?
It's a big question. Who am I? Yeah, I'm a teacher. I would like to start with this. I'm a foreign language teacher, and I really like to teach at secondary schools at first. And maybe I should start earlier. Actually, I studied literature in France, and I did it partly in Amsterdam with the Erasmus program. And when I was in Amsterdam, I noticed how people were learning languages, were learning speaking English, and it was fascinating me. And I decided to switch and to become a language teacher instead of a literature teacher.
So you said you went from a literature teacher to a language teacher. Is that right?
Yeah,
And what
exactly.
prompted that change?
I wanted to live in the Netherlands to start, because I met my husband when I was in this Erasmus program, and I decided to live in the Netherlands, and I took some Dutch classes to learn Dutch. And then I realized that these classes were really inspiring. I was doing communicative language teaching. We were talking with each other. It was not about grammar. It was not about learning words. It was really about interacting with each other. And I thought it was really interesting. And when I decided to stay in the Netherlands, I started this teaching training program to become a French language teacher, to teach in this way, to have this interaction with the group. But my first internship was like a bit of a shock, because I was like in this secondary schools with the pubers, teeners, no, I don't know. And they didn't want me to speak English, to speak French at all. They were not used to this communicative way. And the parents were not used to it. And it was actually more like language classes I knew from France, from the English classes I took.
Like the more traditional ones, you mean?
The more traditional ones.
Okay.
And I really tried to do it differently. So I was in my methodology classes at the university. I learned about CLT, I learned about the CFR, I learned about task-based, and I really wanted to do it this way. But I was a young teacher, and it was really difficult to change the mentalities, to change the beliefs, to change the schools where I was working, to convince my colleagues to do it in another way. But I tried, and I did this communicative task. But in the end, I realized that it was really difficult to change because of the assessments. And I had to prepare my students for some really very grammar exercises, very complex. They still remember they need to make the difference between, in France, it's like between en and I, which is really something specific and that you don't really need to communicate, obviously, when you're a beginner. But I had to do that because this was how we decided to do it all together. So who I am, I'm this teacher, this young teacher who really wanted to change things, and was stuck with this system. And I did it the best I could, and I taught grammar really directly, and I noticed also a lack of motivations. I noticed that the students thought French was really difficult. And in the end, I started years later, to teach at the teacher training program myself. So I became a teacher trainer. And then in my methodology class, I noticed that my students were facing the same problems. They couldn't implement the communicative language teaching properly. And they told me, this is because we cannot experiment, we cannot change things, we cannot. And I was really surprised because in the Netherlands, teachers actually have a lot of autonomy. It's more than in France, it's more like in most countries in Europe. And yeah, I really was wondering why. And this was the beginning of my research project. I really wanted to understand what was actually the problem. And so I created this group of teachers. I observed their lessons. I asked the students. And this is how I became from a teacher, French foreign language teacher, to a teacher trainer, to this researcher. And I want to say that I'm a researcher in practice. I'm a practitioner actually. And I did this research project just because it was together with others. And this is really what I wanted to do. It's also learn, also for myself. Yeah, so this is how I am.
It's a fascinating story because a lot of the little moments that you described, I think Andrew will probably recognize as similar situations that we've probably encountered.
Oh yeah, for sure.
When teaching in Canada, specifically what you said, like being very hard to implement, dealing with this lack of motivation from learners. But I want to go back to this moment when you experienced this shock, because you said that a lot of the parents, a lot of the stakeholders in that very specific scenario that you faced, that you were in, you said that they were not used to communicative language teaching, they're not used to task-based language teaching. And you've also mentioned how difficult it was to convince teachers and how this also had a washback effect on assessments. So perhaps we can walk a little bit back here, Charline, and tell us more from the parent's perspective, from the learner's perspective. What was it like to experience communicative language teaching in the beginning?
I remember I was at this, here it's called 10 minutes talk you have with parents at schools. And I remember being sitting there and parents coming and asking me like, but why they are not learning verbs? They are not learning these verbs. How is it possible? Because they need to learn the verbs. And I'm like, yes, sure. I was preparing with the kids. I was preparing a sort of a show. They need to do to present something in
like
the end. It was really
task.
Yeah. They had to perform something.
Okay.
And I don't remember exactly why, but what it was. But they needed to do this task, and they got some tools from me. But I wasn't really asking them to learn like these verbs without any context. And I would just select which were verbs and which sort of like a chunks they needed to in order to accomplish this task. And the parents were really concerned about this because they were like, and then I asked them, yes, but do you remember your own verbs? Do you remember them? And they were like, yeah, it was very important. I know them. It's okay, but maybe we can switch in French then.
Yeah.
We can do this 10 minutes interview in French. And they're like, no, this I cannot. I was like, but the whole purpose, this is it. What I want to learn the kids is to interact, is to present themselves, is to be able to talk about what they like. And I think this is more important than being able to just
memorize grammar, verbs, and rules.
Yes.
Interesting. And then what about the teachers? Because you've mentioned that it was very difficult to convince the teachers, and this also had a washback effect on the assessments. What was that experience like? Can you walk us through like how you started implementing that, having the conversations with teachers? Why do you think teachers were so resistant to this kind of change?
Not all of them. And I think this is also important to say because it looks like I am the one who wanted this and all the others didn't want to. We were more teachers believing that it's a good idea, but in theory. And in practice, we had some more constraints. And what I heard from my colleagues was more like, we don't have so much time, and we really need to do it in this time we have, and we have to use this textbook because we bought it, and this is it, and This is really easier to assess. Because it's true, it's easier to assess something is wrong or good or wrong. You say that anyway, with something that is just right or wrong. This is what I was looking for. Yeah, than a speaking task for sure. So this was one of the things, and the other was more like some teachers or colleagues that really believed that the basic knowledge. They were like, yes, but the kids first, they need the basic knowledge.
Right.
And then they will practice.
We knew it's a fallacy.
Things. Yes, like we know it's not working this way.
Yes.
But for some reason, it felt something more, logical to them. And also maybe something they had in the past as well. So you're reproducing somehow the way you had this language.
Assuming the parents had the same experience as well, and that's why they wanted it that way. Do you notice anything? You mentioned at the beginning of your introduction, like that you just really wanted to change things. And whenever someone says that, I'm so like curious and fascinated about not just the why, because I think we understand the why. Working with the teachers or any teacher that you've worked with, do you notice any patterns in the others who are also open to change things or passionate about changing things? Is there anything consistent about those people that so strongly want change?
Yeah, I don't know if I really understand the why or the how, because I know the thing is most people or most participants I worked with, they really wanted this interaction. They really wanted to have something more alive, more useful, and they wanted to change the motivation of the students. And they thought that this was something very important. How they did it, it was like they are taking a lot of classes. They were reacting to when I asked for participants, they really wanted to take part of this program to try to change things. Yeah.
Interesting.
And this can be a lot of what Leo and I do on the show, I think, is debunk myths and talk about things that many people think are true and maybe aren't true or only partly true in real life. A myth, maybe this is my myth, is that many countries in Europe, the Netherlands being one of them, people are multilingual pretty consistently. So it's interesting for me to hear about these fallacies that exist in a country like the Netherlands, where people speak, I don't know what the average is, but more than 2 languages pretty fluently, pretty consistently. It's interesting to me that in schools, there's still this way of approaching languages, even in a place where people speak many.
What you need to know is different for English. So this is something we really need to specify because I cannot compare it to English because English is everywhere. And the thing is, if you talk to students and they will tell you, how did you learn English? They will not tell you it's at school. They will tell you, I learn it because I game, because I'm doing video games, because I'm watching movies, because I'm, I don't know, listening to music and I am learning the lyrics by heart. This is the way they are doing it. And they have this kind of immersion here. And I'm talking about the Netherlands. I'm not talking about Spain or about France.
Which are
Because
very
this
low.
doesn't know
Which
the
are
problem.
very low. They're very low in terms of proficiency in foreign languages.
Yeah, because, obviously, is the German, there are more similarities. But when you look at the vocabulary, French, English, there are also lots of words together. But we don't have this immersion. We are not in contact outside of the classroom. And this is something that is working very well for English. For the other languages, like German, Spanish, and French, we don't have this. So the students will have to do it with the school, with the classroom, with the moments. And of course, they can go camping in France. But when you are Dutch and you go camping in France, it's completely possible to just meet Dutch people for some reason. And so this is a challenge we have, like the other foreign languages. And in our research project, we also had English teachers, because they had challenges as well. What they noticed that the kids at school, they had also levels are very different, and they were also focusing on grammar rules and things that were really not motivating for students. And they noticed that this was also something that needed to change.
I got a quick question for teachers watching this. How much time did you spend planning your lessons this week? If you said more than 10 minutes, then you gotta see this. This is Fluentize, a library of more than 650 lessons for teenagers and adult learners. Let's say I want a lesson on social issues. I jump into the lesson navigation, find the video, and boom, I have a complete lesson with authentic video ready to go. And the best part is that it covers everything. Vocabulary focus, listening activities, deep communicative activities that also get your students actually talking. But here's what I love most. It comes with a Google Slide e-lesson ready to share with your class. So what are you waiting for? Head over to fluentize.com, create an account, and see the quality for yourself. It's interesting that you basically walked us through the reasons why we should be doing things differently, which again goes back to what you said earlier about wanting to be a teacher and wanting to change things. And for some reason, language education, I feel like it moves at a snail pace, I guess. It would be the best word to use to describe how fast we are at implementing these changes. And one of the things I remember you saying is this lack of motivation that a lot of students encountered in grammar classes. And I know you've also written papers. I remember reading one of your papers where I think you were talking about constructive alignment, and you talked a little bit about communicative language teaching. So before we jump into assessment, Charline, I would like to maybe paint a new picture of what communicative language teaching is today in 2025 into 2026. What is communicative language teaching today? What does it look like today? And how can we start moving in a direction where we are actually placing communication at the forefront of language education?
Yeah, I think that communicative language teaching is a principle. There are ideas like it should be meaningful, authentic. It's about language skills. It's about interacting with others. This is something that it's an agreement somehow since so many years. But the way it is translated, how you can implement it, can be very different. And you have this task-based way to do it, which is like a big change for some systems or some educational context. But you can also say it's more about creating situations in which students will interact in something that is really useful for them, that that they think it's interesting and authentic, and they will use the language skills. So I think this is how I would define it. And what I realized also in my research context is that because of this autonomy the teachers have in the Netherlands, the schools are also very different. And it was not possible to say, it will be this way. This is the way that you will have to use, all of you. So we really work with principles. And we said, these are the ingredients to have something that is much more communicative. And how you want to translate it in practice with your book, you can use your textbook, but it's just, don't use it as a curriculum. Use it as a tool. And just think by yourself what you want to achieve with your students.
I think what you're saying is communicative language teaching, as you've mentioned, is basically this big idea, these principles that we have to follow. But the way in which we execute those principles, one way is to use task-based language teaching, and you've mentioned textbooks. I feel like that's the biggest issue that we encountered with language education today, Charline, is because I feel like something gets lost in between the principles and the execution.
Yeah.
And a lot of us think that what we're executing in the classroom is somewhat, perhaps, what we would describe as communicative language teaching, but we are communicating, but we're communicating about the language. We're talking about the language. We're not really talking in the language and performing in the language. And one of the biggest, or perhaps one of the strongest messages in your research is that the assessment that we use in the classroom is not neutral, because in a way it shapes what teachers do, it shapes how students learn, and whether or not these communicative goals actually will take place in the classroom. And your work in classroom-based assessment shows that when assessments become more communicative as opposed to more grammatical, teaching improves, teaching follows. So perhaps you could walk us through this, because you argue that assessment can be a driver of pedagogical change. So if we change the way we assess, then we can change the way we teach. How do you explain this idea to teachers who see assessment as something completely different, completely separate from instruction?
It's really context related, for sure. If you're working in a context where there is a high stake assessment examination that you cannot control, this will have effect on what you do, and it's more difficult to change this. And then you can talk about this negative washback effect of a test. And there are a lot of studies that are about this centralized system with this big final examination, which will have a lot of effect. But what I realized, in the context of the Netherlands, but I'm sure in other contexts as well, is that teachers also are creating their own classroom-based assessments. And these assessments can also have an impact on how students learn and what happened in the classroom. So what I noticed is when we did this big inventory is that we had so many tests. Like tests was so important in every observation. When we were doing these classroom observations, the word test will be mentioned, 10 times, even more. And they were like, students will ask, is this for the test? And when is the test? Do you have the grade?
The T word.
High frequency
they were really
vocabulary. Yeah.
easy with this. And it's normal. And we asked the students, we also asked them, why are you learning a language? And they were like, they could answer different things. And they said, the first thing they really said, because I want to interact with others. But the second thing, what actually even more important, I want to go to the next grade. I want to... Yeah. So this is really a big thing. And what I know about this communicative assessment is that it's more complex. So you cannot test a lot. You should test less, but just more aligned with your goals. And this will have an effect on what you do. And then I kind of forgot your questions. I hope I'm
No, it was
right.
just this idea, like how do we, because I think what you're saying makes a lot of sense. And I think Andrew is going to relate to this, because one of the biggest issues for all of us, especially those of us in Canada working within college universities.
I'm having trauma just thinking about it.
Yeah, because it's insane, because you were talking about the word test, and this is basically what we experience here. In a 14-week course, I feel like students are taking, I would say 10 is a short. How many, Andrew? Like on average, would you say it's assignments, tests?
It's almost weekly.
Almost
Maybe
weekly
not quite,
they're being
but
tested.
Yeah, almost weekly.
And we realize that this is why our teaching can change, because that's what you are arguing here, is that if the assessment is more communicative, then the way we teach has to become more communicative. Because it makes because Andrew is going to remember this. I remember working at a college, Charline, and one of the things I remember was like, you know what? I don't want to teach this curriculum as is, because it was a very fragmented, analytical syllabus where I was teaching grammar components after grammar component, mag nuggets, and things like that. And then eventually when they had an exam, they failed miserably because the exam was just testing them on their knowledge of grammar, not their ability to communicate. So that had an effect on their assessment. So I had to make some changes to the assessment in order to be able to get the students to actually pass the course. So I got in trouble. But what you're saying is we need to start at the end. We need to change the assessment so that teaching can ensue. So in your work with teachers, Charline, what changes, what shifts have you seen when the assessments begin to reflect communicative competence as opposed to isolated grammar knowledge?
Well, we saw it was the whole lessons was about the language skills. So we had no explanations of grammar rules like outside of any context. It was always, of course, you need words, of course, you need grammar, you need structure to be able to communicate. But it was also always related to the context, to what they had to do, to the task, mostly. And this was more focused on form. So we really noticed this difference between just explaining grammar points because it is in the book and just explaining grammar because it's something we need to perform a task. So this shift we really saw. And we saw also more speaking activities. And this is something we really noticed was a big difference between the before, when we observed the initial situation, and after. We saw much more speaking activities. And this is something that makes a lesson also more alive, that the students are talking with each other and are active. And they were also more proactive, because its speaking exam is something that it's scaring. It's just like this podcast is scaring because you have to perform. But somehow you will prepare very differently. And then you will ask yourself, what do I need to know? What do I need to do? And so this is what we saw.
Have you used podcasting as an assessment?
Yeah, some people did. Somehow it's like this vlog. This vlog. I don't know. I say it with a Dutch accent now. Vlog. People would talking.
Oh, vlogs. Yeah, vlogs. Yeah, vlogs. Yeah.
Yeah,
For
this
sure.
is something that the kids are watching all the time, and then they are doing it.
Can you give us an example of, for people listening that may be interested in applying this in their classrooms, having more communicative assessments may seem general to that person? I know it's contextual, but maybe one example of an assessment that you've used that follows these principles that you're talking about, that someone listening maybe could tweak in their context?
Yeah, we created different. So what we did with the group is that I didn't want to come with these are exams that you can use. They are already made. You can take them and use them. So what we made is examples, like you say. So we decided to create tasks, assessment tasks that could be used and adapted. And we had 4 realistic situation, like you are in a foreign country because it's an exchange with your school, or there is a language assistant coming into your school and she's there the whole week. You are with your parents on holiday, or you are for some touristic reasons, or you are in a touristic place in the Netherlands and you are encountering a lot of people. And within these situations, we created like task. Yeah, there is this tourist and he's completely lost, and you don't have any device with you, and you have to help him find the way, or you are at this guest house, or you're in this family, you are in this foreign country for the week, and it's the lunch, and they are asking you what you want, what you like. And so these were the situations. And they, of course, it was not completely new for them. They prepared with the teachers in advance. And what we believed is what is also really important is to work with formative activities, something that we don't do enough in the Netherlands. So sometimes you have the test and the summative test in the end, and all the time the students don't really know how they can do it. You don't know what they need to do it, and you discover only at the moment of the summative test that the pronunciation is not correct or that they actually needed more vocabulary. So what we did with the group is that we create this task, these examples, this summative assessment tasks. But next to it, we also created formative assessment activities. And I don't say it's assessment tasks, and they are really activities. Something they could do from the start, from the beginning, to explain the criteria, the rubrics, so what are going to be tested. They could show an examples or task. They will work with what do you really need to do, and then they will work with aspects of the task and then give feedback. So just listen to the students and then use their mistakes to create more content, more lessons, and then prepare them. And the idea is in the end, when they had to take this exam, they will really know, about it. But what we created, because we noticed that normal and generally the speaking exams were really like a script, like something they really knew exactly what they had to do. So they will learn by heart and just try to do the best as they could. But what we created in communicative assessment, we had also principles. And we said one of the principles is the unpredictability. You need to have an element that is not known in advance, because this is real life. And when you will be in this family, you don't know everything in advance. But they would know the theme, so they would know it's about house or your hobby or about what you like to do, your sports. So they could learn vocabulary. And we worked with the CEFR and we looked at speech acts. So something you will be able to ask something politely. You will be able to make suggestions. You will be able to react to positively or negatively within a context. And they trained within these formative activities. And in the end, they could take the exam like not knowing exactly what will happen. And I think it's somehow they thought the students needed to get used to it. It was something really, and the parents as well, because they were like, what do they have to learn exactly? And it's like, yeah, you don't know exactly, but it made them proactive. They were like, they would think, okay, what kind of question I can get? What kind of vocabulary I need? It's different than giving a list and say, those are the words, you have to learn them.
That's fascinating, because this proactivity in their final assessment comes from the unpredictability of the task. Whereas most students, I think Andrew will probably agree with me, most students know exactly what to expect when they have a final exam. It's going to be gap fills about grammar points that they have been studying exhaustively for pretty much their entire lives. But
comprehension
I like the idea.
Yeah.
I like the idea of adding an element of unpredictability to the assessment, where they basically know the theme, they know the topic, but they don't know exactly what's going to happen. Because as you said, I think what I like about what you said, Charline, is that in a way it's trying to mimic real life, what really happens in real situations, because there is an element of unpredictability in certain situations. You might know the vocabulary around a restaurant, but what happens if the server gets your order wrong?
Exactly.
And some of our students, we are now implementing this with our students at the teacher training program. And they come up with really nice ideas, like in this restaurant where they have like cards. It's really too salty. It's really too salty. You have to do something with it. And then, oh no. Or you're gluten-free and there is nothing gluten-free in this card.
That's amazing.
So things like that.
My mind is racing with curiosity now, right? If they're doing a budgeting task, you have this much money for your weekend trip or whatever. But then, you spent too much money at that nice restaurant on the first night, right? And now your budget, half of it is gone. So now you have to, I think that I love this.
What we did is we took it as a criteria as well, because we think we worked with A2, like it's beginners. We said, you're not completely independent. It's not like the B1. So you need the other person to help you. And what we want to value, what we are going to value is the communicative strategies. So if you are able to find a way to explain what you want, find a way to get through this situation, we will value this, because this is something that is very important at the A2 level. And it's something that we are not used to do. And we are looking at what it is, but what it's not, what happened.
Yeah. I really like that. I really like this idea of. So you've mentioned that one of the principles that you guys implemented when designing these communicative assessments was unpredictability. Were there any other principles that you could?
Yeah, we also, there are four or five. We said authenticity. It should match the interest of the students. It should be connecting to real life. It should be, they should have enough creative output. Because sometimes you see tasks like say you have two brothers, say like you like to play guitar.
Right.
And if it's not the case, it's just like translating sentences for somehow. And so we said they need to have enough creative output, find a solution or suggest something for this situation. And then we also have the integrative skills. The fact that they had to integrate skills, because what we noticed is that the assessment of language skills were often focused on only one skill, like reading, and then only listening, only writing, only speaking.
Oh, and you guys wanted to.
We wanted to have at least two language skills, because it's also more like in real life. And then you notice that they can also really use this communicative strategy. If you are reading a text, of course, you will have a lot of words, but then you can reuse them to do this writing task then you have. Or if you are listening to something and then you have to present about it, then you will reuse the words or the intonation, the pronunciation, whatever. And we thought this is really interesting if you're able to do that at this A2 level.
Wow. So we have authenticity, unpredictability, creative output and integrative skills.
Yeah. And I don't want to say these are all my ideas. I looked up, for instance, Morrow or Brown. They were like already mentioning these principles. We just identified them and we said this should be ingredients very important to the tasks that we will design.
I like that. I was just thinking, back in the day when I was doing my own research into communicative language teaching, I found out that it dates back to 1972 with Himes, and I think Savignon also wrote about communicative language teaching. So we're looking at 72. How many years ago is that? Like more than 40.
Yeah, more than 50 years ago.
So my question then becomes, since we have this rhetoric, everyone preaching about communicative language teaching, and we've had decades of research into it, why do you think communicative assessment becomes or has still remained so rare in school settings, even though we've had this plethora of communicative language teaching research?
Well, I think it depends, once again, on the context. I think it's expensive, if I may be honest. When you look at high stakes, for instance, in the Dutch situation, in the Dutch context, and they don't want to assess speaking skills at the national level, because you need a lot of teachers. It's complex. You need more teachers. It has also to do with reliability, because it's true, if you talk to experts in assessments, they will tell you, yes, it's all really nice, it's all constructive alignment, but the test, it's not really reliable. It's more subjective. You have a part of subjectivity. But I still think it's more valid. And I think, what do we need? We need more validity, actually, in school context. And so this is something that is important. And I also think that, for the teachers, they also need more time to be trained also to how to assess something like that. If you are alone doing a speaking test, it's with 30 kids and 7 classes, it's a lot. It's really intensive. So you cannot do it as much as I am doing now. And like we talk about, the grades are really important. The tests are really important. The parents want to know how the kids are doing. And this might be a reason why it's not done that way.
Okay.
There's different stakeholders in that, right? So I'm sure they'll want to ask about policy in a second with schools, but let's circle back to the parents for a minute, because at the beginning of our conversation, you mentioned that they didn't quite get the non-grammar instruction aspect. Did you walk them through this assessment strategy that you've just described? And if so, were they then on board and they understood the rationale behind it?
When I was a teacher, I was in contact with the parents. As a teacher trainer, I'm in contact with the teachers, and they are in contact with their students, with the parents of their students. And sometimes they say it's difficult to convince, because when they want to, for instance, to speak in the target language, and the kids will not understand everything in the beginning. Yeah, if they have... It's also if they don't have a good classroom management, for instance, this will be very difficult. And this is the reason. And we noticed that a change in the Netherlands in grades, like the schools want to give less grades. And I noticed that for parents, it's also a bit of a strange thing, because they really want to know how the kids are doing. They want to they want to be able to change things. I have a daughter now. She is also 13, and experience like the other way around now. I'm the parents who want the grade. Somehow I want to see things. I'm like, how she's doing for math, for instance. I have no clue, no idea, because it's all formative. And I'm like, but what if she's not doing it well at some point? So I think these formative activities, they should be, they are really important. If you are assessing in a communicative way with less assessment moments, summative assessment moments, then this formative task, these formative activities should be very important, and they should be communicated to not only the students themselves, so that they know what they have to learn, but the parents as well. And I think that a narrative feedback is so much more interesting than a grade in the end. If you can read what your children are doing exactly, then you don't have this feeling like not knowing anything.
Narrative feedback, very interesting. As opposed to you're an A, you're a B, which I think goes back to that whole idea of growth mindset with Carol Dweck, where if a student sees themselves getting like a certain grade, they believe that they're never going to be able to learn languages. And I feel like to a certain extent, the way we assess, the way we grade students will definitely affect their competence in learning a language in the future. Because a lot of people would normally say, I'm not very good at learning languages.
Yes.
But then we should also think, were you actually exposed to a good method of learning languages, or you were just like a product of this horrible system that we've had for many years? But as you were speaking, you've talked a lot about constructive alignment, and I know this is one of your areas of expertise. So for those people who are listening to us, watching us, and they're not familiar with that, perhaps you could walk us through, maybe tell us more about what constructive alignment is. I do know about it, not as basically being some sort of a design principle, but also a diagnostic tool. So maybe walk us through what constructive alignment is.
Yeah, it's the alignment between the learning objectives, the learning activities, and the assessment activities. And those three components are very important. If they're aligned, you have an efficient way, an efficient curriculum, and you will be teaching in an efficient way. And what we notice is that the learning objectives are, in most systems, they are communicative. They are based in Europe, they are based on the CFR, and somehow they get lost if the assessment is not assessing those communicative learning objectives. And what we see is that between the assessment activities and the learning activities, we see that there is a sort of effect. What we will hear about another terminology, but it's this backwash effect, of the washback effect. But it's the other way around as well. The activities are, like you said, if you are doing something very communicative, but your assessment is not, then it's frustrating for the students, and because they will not be prepared for the test. And it's also frustrating for the teacher because he's not going to do it well. And this is something we think it's very important as a teacher. We really want to prepare students well for what they have to achieve, because they are in different contexts. It can be very important to get a nationality or to, So we really want to prepare them well. And the other way around is if the assessment is very communicative, then it will have effect on the teaching practices for sure, but also in how students will learn. If I tell my students you will have to translate words and it will be written, they will not try to pronounce them well. And
Right.
they will definitely not try to put them into sentences because it's a waste of time. They will just the day before or 2 days before, they will learn it by heart. And they will probably learn it in the wrong way with the wrong pronunciation. To be sure, they will writing it well. Like my son will say emergency. He knows it's
Right.
emergency. So he knows he's going to write it the right way. And it's really in contradiction with what you want to achieve, this learning, these communicative learning goals, where you say, no, I want you to be able to, explain something in an hospital.
Very interesting. So I'm actually now, because you've mentioned this whole idea of alignment. So I want to talk about what happens when there is some sort of misalignment. There's a misalignment between the goals, the tasks, and the assessment.
Yeah, it will
How-
narrow the curriculum. It will narrow
Yeah.
the curriculum. If your test is only testing one aspect, then of course this will have more attention in your teaching. And then you will not be able to cover all these goals you have.
Interesting. And I want to talk about now I think it makes more sense then, because then if the goal is not aligned with the tasks and the tasks are not aligned with the assessment, if these three are not really fully aligned, then I feel like this is going to have, as you described, it's definitely going to have a negative impact on their communicative competence. They might not be able to pronounce words properly. They might not be able to communicate in certain ways. Okay.
But it can
So-
have a positive washback. It can have
yeah?
a positive as well. If you are doing it like very aligned with your communicative goals, if you are trying to translate your goals into assessment tasks, into criteria to assess your students, then you will see a change. And this is what we experiment. This is what we saw in our research project, is that when changing the assessment activities, that what happened in the teaching, in the choice of learning activities, you will see a change and more communication in the lessons.
I'm assuming that with kids, maybe they don't, I don't know. Because as teachers, you're saying that we see the difference, we see the change. Do the students actually see the change? Because I think one pushback that might be valid is how do students measure their own progress?
Yeah.
So for better or worse, when we give a grade, they can see the number and they can compare. It doesn't mean what we think it means, but at least they can see the number versus a communicative assessment. How do we as teachers help the learner of any age gauge their own progress when we're removing that kind of numerical
Well, I don't think
aspect to it?
you are not. It's not because you don't have a grade that you don't have this assessment, this summative moment, and this. If you don't say it's A B, but it's A1, A2, a B1, then it's the same. It's just a question of changing the way you call it. But I think the kids, they could see, okay, if I have in this rubric, if I get this A2 or A2 plus, then I will get the points, or I will be able to go to the next grade, or whatever you are using this assessment for. And this is something we didn't change, in fact.
Okay.
So it's more that some schools translated our rubric with to be able to put grades, because this was a system and they had to keep grades. But other schools said, oh, we will give this a CFR level. And we say at the end of this year, you need to have A2. And if you have A1 plus, it's not enough. And it's like under the level. And if you have B1, you are above the level. So Yalamok. And then in this way, what I liked with this is that A1 is not bad. It's just not A2. And this was more positive because they could explain to kids, like, what you do is this, because you are not able to make a complete sentence. You're just using words like this. So you are in this A1 description. And we want to bring you to this A2 description, and therefore you need to use like complete sentences. You need to, and they were more aware what they needed to do. It was not just only you need to translate so many words, or you need to be. You are talking with them about what do you want to achieve with this language. Now you are not able to have a conversation.
You could use the can-do
Yes.
statements, I'm assuming, potentially in there as well. Can do this, can do this.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's more positive because we analyze also the rubrics that were used before, and sometimes they were really quantitative. They're like, oh, you are able to conjugate so many verbs, and you are using these words, and it was very quantitative. And then we really look at the qualitative aspects of it.
And you can also include that mindset thing where you can't do this yet. So
Yes,
you
exactly.
can-
It's
yeah.
what we did. Like
It's
we
very
did.
interesting. I never thought about it this way. I think it's definitely a healthier approach to grading, to assessment, and I actually like everything that
Yeah.
we're hearing here.
Now, I think motivation is key. And
Oh.
if you don't have this, then you will not be able to learn a language. And we know all learners of another language that you will have this moment that you feel desperate because you're not able to find your words and do something. I think that encouraging it is more important because of this. We talked about motivation in the beginning, and it's just something that it's a pity. You have kids, they're coming from primary schools and they're enthusiastic. They're truly enthusiastic about learning new languages because they don't do it at the primary schools. French is new, German is new. And after a year, of course, they are becoming completely adolescents, but you notice that they're like, oh no, like you say, French is difficult. It's just not for me. I'm not good at languages.
I think in a way we have killed our joy for learning languages. I think the joy of learning a language has been somewhat murdered, killed by this obsession with testing, with assessing their grammar. And I think this is why so many, perhaps not the reason why, but one of the main reasons perhaps why a lot of universities, a lot of colleges are shutting down their language programs, because people just lost their passion for learning a language. And just out of curiosity, since you guys were talking about the Dutch, I found out here after a little bit of research that the Dutch are exceptionally multilingual. The average Dutch speaks 3.2 languages, just so you know.
Well, I
3.2.
mean, if I go in the street right now and I ask people, how many languages do you speak? They will not say 3 or 2. They will say 2, Dutch and English, probably.
Right.
And I know it's a multicultural country for sure. So
Yeah.
they will also have probably other languages, but not the one they learned at school. Definitely not the one they learned at school.
Because the one that we learn at school, actually, we can't say that we actually learned. I feel like we studied, but we didn't really learn it, if we're using that study and learn distinction. I studied...
Memorize things for the test.
Like
and then
Andrew
you
studied
forget it
Spanish.
after.
He studied... You learned French in school.
We
but
took
did you,
French classes here in
but did
Canada.
you
It's-
actually-
It's a bilingual country, officially,
learn-
anyway.
French,
I see it in Belgium as well. I was there and I say it's 2 languages. That's French, and French is the first language they had to learn at school, and still they are not able to do it when you are in the Dutch-speaking, Flemish-speaking part of it. And this is really a pity.
In Canada, it makes sense because most of the country when you walk outside to do whatever you're doing in life, there's no French. We live in Toronto and we always joke, you can pretty much hear majority of languages that exist on planet Earth walking around Toronto, except French. You'll hear a little bit of French, but it's not very common.
Yeah.
You'll hear Arabic and Chinese and Japanese and Korean and Spanish and Portuguese. And
I think it's a challenge, but because we know that the input is very important, the exposure is very important, and when you have 2 hours, it's not even hours, complete hours at school from this subject. If you don't hear this language outside of the classroom, it will take a lot of time before you can do something with the language. But if you get the motivation, if you give the kids that they feel that they want to listen to this music, they want to watch this movie, they want to try it, they want to go in this app to meet someone, to be able to exchange, then you have it. You give them this
drive, this motivation, this
drive.
desire, this joy of actually wanting to communicate and
somebody
learn a
must have
language.
tried this because it seems so simple, but I'm imagining a language classroom with no desks, no chairs, no sitting down. So then it has to be active. You have to be, because I'm thinking back to my primary school and my middle school, and we had these elective classes where it was sewing class and cooking class and wood shop, where they had these saws and there was no sitting down. You'd walk around to each station and I wasn't very good at it, but that's the learning by doing thing. And we treat language typically as a knowledge subject, right? Like you sit down and do your math equations, you learn about the periodic table and you memorize the symbols. But language really needs to be more like the woodshop class or the cooking class where you actually, so I'm imagining this like no desks and then you just mingle and you do the tasks, and someone must have tried it because it's such a simple idea, but I wonder if that would work.
I also think that in more playing games, more listening to music, more talking about interesting topics, this is something really important. I definitely think so.
It is funny because earlier in our conversation, you were talking about the teachers, and one of your key contributions is showing how the teachers' beliefs and the materials that they have available impact whether or not communicative goals become communicative practice. And you've mentioned that a lot of teachers have said that it's very hard to do this because there's a lot of changes. It's hard to implement. Sometimes they have they have problems with institutional pressures. They have to use the course book. They have certain exam structures. You've mentioned the time constraints. But when you work with teachers, Charline, what kind of belief patterns do you see that teachers have ingrained in them that hinder communicative assessment and therefore communicative teaching?
I think they have some misconceptions about learning grammar, about this what I said at the beginning about this basic knowledge you need.
Mm-hmm.
They're also afraid that if they are doing only fun things, they call it this way, the children will not be able to do it well later, that they will lock the grammar, the structure, the vocabulary, and they are a bit afraid of this. And they're like, but if I don't teach grammar, they will not learn it. They will not, and then, they're a bit afraid of this. But I always told them, you need the words, you need the grammar to be able to speak, to be able to read, to be able to write. It's not like you are not doing any grammar. It's not like you are not doing any learning by heart. Of course they will learn and it's okay. But then you need to change the purpose of it. And this is what we did with the assessment. The objective is be able to communicate, is to be able to perform a task, to use the language skills. This is your purpose. And what do you need to do? What do they need to, in order to do that? They need some words, of course, about this theme. They need some grammatical structures. If you want them to make suggestions, of course, they will have to know how to do that. If you want them to ask questions, of course, they need to know how to ask questions. But it's not the other way around. And what in textbook is often the other way around. Okay, we need to learn them to ask questions, so we are going to invent a task to do this. And it is what we want to assess in the end, if they are able to ask questions, but not. You understand what I mean? And it's also using the past. Maybe my question is not the best example, but it's using the past tense. Okay, if this is the goal, in the end, you are not going to achieve your real objective. Yes. And you have to change this. And this is something they found very difficult because it's not the way they learned. It's not the way they used to do. It's not the way it is in the textbook. So it's, I don't trust the textbook anymore. Why? And
mainstream.
Yes,
mainstream education is not like that either. It's not. And it's funny you mentioned that because I usually joke with teachers and here on the podcast too that when we teach the students the simple past and then you ask them to do a task where they only have to use the past to talk, I'm like, what kind of conversation can you have with a person where you only use the past? The past is one thing that you might need to be able to accomplish a task, but it's not the only thing.
No,
right?
And there is more. There is much more. And this communicative strategy as well. And then they will be proactive. They will tell you, the students, what they need. They will tell you, I cannot talk about my holiday because I don't know anything about.
So you teach at the point of need. You realize what kinds of gaps or learning opportunities there are from the task at hand. And then you can, okay, so let's focus on these things. So you're actually teaching them what they actually really need in order to be able to perform in the language.
Of course. And this is when they realize, of course, they will learn all these grammar things because you don't have languages without words. You don't have languages without structure. And there is also a big difference between the beginner's level and later on. And I think
Okay.
when you have C1 or C2, of course, you will have more attention to accuracy. But it will be easier because they have, and still, they will make mistakes. Like you could say, this is A2, mistake. The person is still
Yeah.
able to speak at the C1. It's not like there are like categories. Like you say, the past tense is something you do in A2 and then you know it forever.
Forever.
I love
Yes.
the misconceptions. I was writing them down here. You need some basic grammar to communicate, even though we know it's not true. If they're having fun, if they're enjoying themselves, they're not learning, which is also a very common one. And the third one is if I'm not teaching grammar, they're not learning, as if there is a direct pathway between what you teach and what they learn. Very interesting. I think you've mentioned textbooks as well, and Andrew and I are also fascinated by textbooks. And the more we talk to researchers, we talk to experts on the podcast, the more we realize that textbooks should not be followed slavishly. They should be some sort of like a support material, perhaps is the best word. But in your work, many teachers rely on textbooks that are not aligned with these communicative goals. So I think the question I have for you, Charline, is how do you help teachers who want to move more towards communicative assessment and communicative language teaching? How do you help them move beyond what's in the textbook?
Well, the thing is, when you look at this textbook and when you look at the materials and even the assessments, they have some communicative assessment in there. But they don't use them. They use the more traditional ones because they are more easy to correct, easy to introduce. So this is something that we started with. Take the language skills assessment in your textbook and look at it. Maybe you can add some more unpredictability. Maybe you can add like some more integration. But in the end, they have already something. And also in the textbook, you always have like this nice, at least in the textbook, I know here, the most common ones, you have this task in the end. And I know my colleagues, they are also working with tasks first. Don't do it in the end, but because what happened now is like this task is in the end when you have time. It looks like it's something, you can do for fun in the end if you have some time. And really often, very often, they just don't do it. So you do all this grammar, words, things, and then the traditional assessment and the task if we have time. And the idea is now to say, look, you have a really nice communicative task. Just put it in the beginning and say, this is the goal. This is what we are going to do. And what do you need in order to complete this task? And then you will change exactly what I said in the beginning. You will change the goal. And it's not about these grammar points. It's about completing this task. And then, of course, you will need some grammar. And maybe it's not even the one they thought it was useful in the book in the first place. Maybe you realize there is even a mismatch in what they are asking.
I did something different this semester. I had not done this before as formally as I did it. I had them perform a reflection. My students are adults. A reflection on their progress and what their goals were in the beginning of the semester, and had them articulate how many of those they feel they've improved on / achieved and where they still need to make progress. And it was interesting to read them. And some of them made videos, some of them did it in writing. But a lot of them mentioned a correlation between grammatical elements that they struggled with before, and now that they understand where to attach them to which task like they're completing. And some of them, I won't say their names, of course, but some of them were saying, before I just learned past simple, how to conjugate verbs, but now I understand how to, like, where and when I should be using this, in which context, not just how to conjugate sentences. Another, Leo, I think this is your student, you say this a lot. Students say to you, like, Leo, again, present perfect? We've learned this 15 times, but they still can't.
We learned this already. So
to the point of, this is an A2 structure. They learned it in A2 and then we're done. Whereas present perfect, I don't know the percentage, but it's a very low percentage of how much we actually use it as 5%. A tense. It's very low. Leo likes to call it as a table setter, I think you call it, where you ask a question and then the conversation changes right after that. So the reflection was very interesting, I thought.
And I'm now taking a Spanish class because I wanted to experience again what it is to learn a language when you're not in immersion. And I realized this, like about this subjunctive, which is something the Spanish want to use a lot. And we do this as French, in French too. So there are some similarities, but it's different. And I noticed that what I really need is actually to know, like, how can I interact on WhatsApp? Can I say to someone, have a nice day, or get better soon? And this is typically something you use with the subjunctive, but I don't need to know all the rules about the subjunctive, which make me really actually stressed about it, because it's like really complicated, and I'm like not able to do all these exercises. But what I really want to know now at this point is how I can use this to say these little sentences, like in a shop when you leave, you say someone, que te vaya bien. And this is a subjunctive.
That's a perfect example. When I learned Spanish, that was like the same experience. And then I just learned that there's basically 3 or 4 of them examples that you will use that are very high frequency, right? Que te vaya bien, que tenga un buen día, ojalá que.
Yeah.
And that's it. That's pretty much, it's not it. There's many. But for me, in the context that I was living, like those 4 served me very well.
So are you both saying that you didn't learn all the rules for the subjunctive?
Not yet.
Not yet.
But it depends on your level. And I think it's important. It's the same as, this is an example from my study about in French, like when you want to ask something politely, you will say, I would like. And this is about the conditional. And then I observed a classroom, and they were like explaining the whole conditional and this whole mode that is not during a tense and blah, blah. And then you get them lost. They don't know it anymore. Yes. And in the end, they just want to ask something politely. And you can just say, this is a form of a conditional. This is what is important in this moment, because this is something you want to do in order to complete this task.
And I believe that everyone who's listening right now is probably feeling inspired, but a little bit overwhelmed, because, we've talked a lot about some very good ideas, very interesting concepts. We've come up with a few examples. And I feel like you've done a very good job through your research, Charline, to describe how meaningful change often comes from these very small, intentional shifts in how teaching, learning, and assessment interact. I think the question I have for you as we start coming to an end here is, for a teacher who is listening to us, wants to make their assessment more communicative, but has no idea where to start, what would be that smallest actionable step that they can take in the right direction?
I made a checklist.
And
it's free to download. So you can go on my site, just download the checklist and look at your assessment, not the one who's assessing grammar. Look at the one you're assessing language skills. Look at
Is
your
that the
speaking.
CBA? Is that the one?
No, I think it's still in Dutch. Right, it will come in really soon in English. Okay, but you can translate it nowadays really easily. But in this checklist, you have these ingredients I said in the beginning about this unpredictability, about the integrative of skills, and they are like definition, and you can look critically language skills assessment, that is speaking or writing or whatever, and then try to answer yes to all these statements. And by doing this, you will change, and sometimes not a lot, but you will just change enough to make your assessment more communicative. And this is it. What we did with this checklist, based on the checklist, we made examples of assessments that are communicative. And we made examples of rubrics that could be used. But we don't want to be prescriptive. We said those are examples that you could use as a sort of inspiration to change your own material, because it's important to keep what you think is good in what you do.
And where can people download that, Charline?
It's on my website on the page.
Get to the show notes.
If you send us the link, we can put it in the show notes. Yeah.
And
great.
Since I have a few more questions before we wrap up. We talked a lot about misconceptions in the show today, and specifically misconceptions about communicative assessments. What would you say, based on your experience working with teachers in Europe, what is one misconception that you think teachers should let go of in the next year?
I really think about this basic knowledge. Like, you think first we will only learn words and only learn grammar points, and then we will able to interact or to use language skills. I compare it very much with to learn swimming. If you only have the theory, you will never be able to swim. So you need some water, and you need to, and not too much, of course. You don't want them to drown, but they need some water to experience, and you need to do it both. So don't be afraid to start with a speaking exam in the first year. And at A1, look at what they need to do. It's not like they will be able to talk an hour and a half in a podcast about communicative assessment, for sure. But if you know you have these goals and you give them, and you will see they will be able to do something already. And it will be a beginning. And so always just use this focus on form. So use a context to talk about grammar.
Another one I have, since you've mentioned the idea of alignment, I'm thinking about the design. I'm thinking about the design of lessons, and how there's more often than not, there's also this distance between assessments and tasks, between what we do when we teach and the way we assess our students. I think the question I have for you is, how can teachers, practitioners design lessons so that their tasks, their activities, and the assessments feel like they're part of the same universe as opposed to complete separate worlds?
Well, I will use, I don't know, I don't want to overwhelm anybody, but I will use another term, which is that's really important. It's backward design.
Backwards design.
And I will tell them, start with the learning goals, just formulate, select, choose your learning goals. And then instead of starting with your nice activity, just think about how you want your students to show they attain these learning goals. What do they need to do to show you they are attained these learning goals? Then try to formulate criteria that will help you measure this. Make your summative assessment first and decide how you can put some unpredictability, because this is something you want them to be able to do. Look at this. And once you have these learning goals and your final task or final examination, then go backwards and then try to see what do they need for activities in order to attain these goals. And what I would say is also, next to these activities, it's to put some formative activities inside. So show them the rubrics first, show them examples. It shouldn't be a secret. A test shouldn't be a secret. And something that they really need to know, this is what I will be able to do after 10 weeks or whatever. And then let them try a little bit and then give them feedback. And it's a feedback, it's like a formative assessment. It's something that shouldn't be graded in any case. It's just something to try, to experiment, to practice in a safe space. Them experience, like them, for instance, answer question they didn't prepare. Let them do this a lot. And then in the end, it will not be the first time they do this the day of the final task. And they will be able to do that. And I would like to say something that the students we interviewed said. They said it was more scary. They really said it was more scary to have this. They have to improvise. They say we had to improvise the day of the test. But they also say it was nice because we had less homework. We didn't have to learn by heart all this list of words, because we practiced them so many times during the lessons that we knew the words already. So we had less homework. And they saw this as a positive thing. We learn less by heart, but we practice more.
What I'm hearing is that there's a good balance, perhaps not a good balance, but there is this ratio of maybe 20-30% fear and about 80-70% excitement, because that's this is what we want. We want to, I think what we should be aiming at in 2026 is bringing this joy back that we've somewhat lost with learning languages, especially in this age of AI. I have one more question, but I know Andrew wants to ask one.
Yeah, I will say something about this enjoyment, because I really like this, and I think it's more important to put some more emotions in language learning, because you learn a language in the end, it's something that will do something with yourself, will change yourself. And this is the reason why we became language teachers. And I'm sure that when you get little joy with your students, then it's half of the work.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like that's the one thing that AI cannot recreate.
Exactly.
It's the emotional aspect of learning a language. And for some reason, we have been ignoring this for a long time. And we're just testing, very much like you would test a machine, right? We're dealing with human beings, not machines, right? So
I'm reminded, Leo, of, I think one difficult thing, Charline, right, is for many teachers is to purposely remove themselves in a way from the process. When we apply tasks and we assign tasks, we are not usually as involved in the grammatical instruction. We're just at the front lecturing or teaching. So redefining this word of what does teaching communicatively mean. But Leo, I'm reminded of our conversation with Paul Nation, because I've been listening to it the last couple of days, getting it ready. And he said that you must believe that by not teaching, people can learn, right?
yeah.
So this thing of just because we've taught it once doesn't mean that they've learned it. Just because we've taught something doesn't mean that they've acquired it. And people can learn things without it being explicitly taught to them as well. And that's kind of my reflection on, Charlie, what you've been saying the last couple of minutes here.
Like you too with the subjunctive in Spanish.
Yes.
You guys can use it.
But it's also these proactive things from the students that you give them. They know what they need actually to achieve this task. And the thing is, if they know that, they will find ways to achieve this. And in this way, now also with AI, you can also use it to learn, of course. And with all these materials, if you give them, and they will also find ways other than only the teacher.
Yeah. It's funny. I just wrapped up a 4-week course with a group of teachers from Mexico, and we basically just used tasks throughout the entire course. And one of the things I remember hearing from some of the students was like, Leo, this class was so much fun. We just spoke all the time. We were making decisions. And I remember when they did their presentations, which was part of their final project, I could see how much pride they had in it, how much fun they were having doing it. And I think I tried my best. I wasn't really sure if my tasks, my goals, and my assessment were fully aligned, but I feel like to a certain extent they were. And Charline, to wrap this up, when you think about the role of assessment, the role that assessment can play in shaping and creating more communicative, more human language classrooms in the age of AI, what gives you the most hope?
What gives me the most hope is that what I hope with this is that students, maybe they won't be able to speak fluently French or German when they finish their school, but they will give them this, I don't have the words, but they will want to learn it maybe later on. They will give it this drive. This is the word I was looking for. To maybe take some more classes, maybe do something with the language later, or maybe take, like me, a Spanish class like many years later. And the thing is, I remember I had 8 years of Spanish at school, 8 different teachers. I only remember one. And I even remember her name. And she was like, Sophie was her name. And why I remember this teacher? Because we went to the movie, because we had to learn a song by heart, because we read a book. And we had to make a presentation about it. And I was like, okay, this is it. And each time, this is what Sophie said. And it's really strange, but I think this is, in this sense, you can make the difference. So it's,
Way to go, Sophie.
Hey.
Thank you. Thank you, Charline. Thank you for this.
It changes the motivation too, just to wrap it, because Leo, we talked, I don't know if you know who Sarah Mercer is, Charline, but we talked with her last year, and she was talking about motivation of students' engagement and fake engagement, where students will
versus real
sometimes fake being engaged because they respect their teacher and they want their teacher. Sometimes I think with grammatical features and getting the grammar right, they're trying to do it to impress the teacher. But in this case, with communicative teaching, it sounds like their actual intrinsic motivations are activated and they're doing it for themselves, which
of course,
is great.
It's an ideal world. And when we are working with adolescents, we won't have them all intrinsic motivated. But I think if you let them match this extrinsic motivation because they want to have a good grade with doing something with the language, then you achieve something. And maybe the motivation will change.
Yeah. We hope so. We hope so. Charline, thank you very much for coming on the show. Thank you very much for sharing your expertise with us. I think I learned a lot today. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me.